Across blistering deserts and frozen plains, Native American runners moved with unbroken rhythm, carrying news, survival, and hope farther than outsiders thought humanly possible. Their footsteps beat like drums upon the earth, short, steady, never wasted. To strangers, such endurance seemed unnatural, yet to the people, it was tradition. At sunrise, moccasins brushed dew from tall prairie grass as messages traveled faster than horses, stitching distant communities together with every tireless mile. Chasing soldiers often collapsed in exhaustion, heavy boots sinking into mud, while runners glided through forests and mountains, guided by memory and breath. Villages taught this gift early. Children played running games, elders sang breath songs, and endurance was woven into daily life, body, and spirit. What secret allowed them to run for days without rest? The answer lies in food, training, ceremony, and a bond with the living land. Long before horses galloped across the plains, Native Americans relied on their own legs to move swiftly through vast and unforgiving landscapes. Running was not recreation, it was survival. Across deserts, forests, and mountains, footsteps carried messages, food, and prayers. To outsiders, such distances seemed miraculous. But to Native communities, endurance was tradition carefully cultivated and deeply trusted. Childhood was the beginning of that training. Games disguised discipline as joy. Children raced through meadows, splashed across rivers, and chased shadows until lungs burned. Each playful sprint across hillsides was building rhythm, strength, and breathing patterns. By adolescence, stride and cadence had become second nature. Short, steady steps, relaxed shoulders, soft landings. Endurance was learned early, not as punishment, but as life's preparation. Ceremony gave that preparation meaning. Running was ritual as much as exercise. Elders taught breath songs to guide inhalation and exhalation. They sang chants that aligned lungs with rhythm, turning effort into verse. Each mile became a prayer, each step an offering to ancestors and earth. Running was a spiritual connection, transforming distance into devotion. Purpose made endurance practical. Hunters turned stamina into their greatest weapon. They shadowed deer or elk for days, wearing animals down until they collapsed in exhaustion. These persistence hunts demanded lungs and patience more than arrows. Success meant food for families. Failure meant hunger. In both triumph and struggle, running measured survival itself. Messengers bore even greater burdens. Carrying only pouches or carved sticks, they traveled alone across deserts, ridges, and storm-lashed plains. They crossed night and day without rest, relying on memory of landmarks and strength of will. Through them, communities stayed connected. Warnings delivered, alliances kept, villages united. Europeans recorded such feats with awe. They told of men covering 50, even 100 miles in a single stretch. To outsiders, such endurance seemed supernatural. To Native Americans, it was neither miracle nor myth. It was necessity, refined through generations. In these practices lay the foundation. Children learning through play, rituals binding spirit to body, hunters and messengers proving the value of every mile. Running was not for glory, it was for life. Knowledge of endurance grew deeper with each generation. Elders reminded the young that running was not about fighting the body, but listening to it. Metallic taste on the tongue, tightness in the legs, or shortness of breath were signals to adjust, not surrender. Endurance was harmony, not punishment. Those who learned to hear the body's whispers could extend journeys mile after mile. Clothing and tools supported that harmony. Soft moccasins flexed naturally with every step, letting runners feel the ground beneath while protecting the soul from sharp stones. Buckskin leggings and shirts allowed the body to breathe in heat and kept warmth close and cold. In snow, snowshoes widened the footprint, spreading weight across fragile crusts. In desert terrain, sandals spared the feet from blistering heat. Every piece of clothing was chosen for necessity, never luxury, and every ounce carried had to prove its worth. Foodways became fuel. Corn, beans, squash, and seeds provided steady energy, while berries offered natural sweetness. Venison, rabbit, and bison replenished strength. Pemmican, meat pounded together with fat and dried fruit, was a miracle food, lightweight and long-lasting, carried in small pouches for endless miles. Before setting out, runners ate lightly, broths, roasted seeds, or thin corn cakes. Water was sipped in moderation, never gulped, to keep the stomach calm during relentless travel. Navigation lived in memory and in story. Trails were not simply paths, they were lessons retold by elders. A leaning pine that pointed north, a spire of stone shaped like a hawk, or the distinct sound of a creek after snowmelt. All became maps etched into memory. At night, the stars guided. In fog, the direction of wind across grass revealed hidden valleys. Feet and mind together carried the runners safely across vast distances without written charts. Weather, too, was a teacher. Heat demanded patience, slowing the pace, seeking shade during the hottest hours, pouring a trickle of water over hair to cool the body. Cold required movement before frost stiffened limbs, lungs learning to draw breath through sharp air. Storms asked respect, sometimes waiting them out, sometimes angling across wind so it pushed instead of resisted. The skilled runner did not fight the elements but partnered with them, bending without breaking. Community gave running its purpose. At the end of exhausting journeys, families gathered with water, food, and fire. Children counted final strides aloud, memorizing rhythm through voices. Elders shared stories of why each path existed and who had once survived because of it. The finish was never marked by ribbons or trophies, but by the sight of a village safe, fed, and united for another night. Endurance among Native Americans was never an accident of nature. It was carefully shaped through daily practice, cultural wisdom, and deep harmony with the land. Strength alone could not explain their ability to run for days. Their true advantage was balance, between body, spirit, and environment. Training began at dawn. Villages stirred not with bells, but with footsteps. Boys and girls rose together, running circles around lodges or climbing hillsides before the sun cleared the horizon. They learned that lungs must open gradually and that breath must be steady, never forced. Elders encouraged them with songs rather than commands. These songs became guides, reminding runners to inhale with drum beats and exhale with chants until rhythm carried them farther than willpower ever could. Diet transformed food into fuel. Heavy meals slowed outsiders, but native runners knew how to eat lightly and often. Corn cakes, roasted seeds, and thin broths kept energy steady without weighing the stomach. Hunters carried pemmican, pounded meat blended with fat and dried berries that lasted weeks without spoiling. A few small bites could sustain miles. Water was taken carefully, in sips instead of gulps, preserving balance in the body even during exhausting journeys. Ritual gave endurance purpose. Before long runs, some communities bathed in rivers, letting cold water awaken muscles and sharpen will. Others burned sage or cedar, brushing fragrant smoke across skin, believing it purified spirit as much as body. Each mile carried prayers, not just effort. Distance became devotion, turning a test of stamina into an act of meaning. The land itself became the greatest teacher. Deserts demanded patience. Runners learned to move with shorter strides, conserving energy against heat. Mountains shaped lungs, teaching how to draw longer breaths in thin air. Forests required agility, weaving swiftly between roots and trunks. Snow forced balance and caution, every step a lesson in perseverance. By adapting rather than resisting, Native Americans turned every environment into a training ground, and every run into a partnership with nature. Running was never individual glory. It was practiced in groups, youth beside elders, women beside men. Together they carried loads, tested endurance, and proved that running was not a sport, but a service. Community gave strength, and purpose gave distance. The endurance of Native Americans was not built on muscle alone, but on a way of thinking. To run was to accept hardship without fear, to treat discomfort as a companion rather than an enemy. Pain was not punishment. It was a teacher. Breathing through fatigue, adjusting pace to calm the body, and focusing the mind kept them moving long after others would stop. Mental discipline grew alongside physical training. Runners were taught to keep their eyes soft, never staring at the horizon with frustration, but letting it approach naturally. They fixed attention on the rhythm of feet, the sound of breath, and the steady beat of heart. By narrowing awareness to simple patterns, they endured hours that would have broken a distracted mind. Spiritual belief deepened this focus. Running was not only transport, it was ceremony. Each step carried prayers into the world, each mile a sacred offering. Some runners whispered names of ancestors to keep courage alive. Others sang quietly to maintain rhythm. These practices gave distance meaning, transforming miles of hardship into acts of devotion. Endurance also required resilience to solitude. Messengers often traveled alone for days. In silence, they trusted memory of paths, stars, and winds. They trusted their own will to overcome fear of night, storms, or predators. This solitude made them strong, teaching that every step was supported not by crowds but by spirit, community, and land. The practical rewards of this endurance were profound. Villages could communicate across impossible distances without horses or riders. Hunters could provide food when herds wandered far. Warriors could move swiftly, striking where least expected. Endurance was not a talent admired from afar. It was the invisible thread that kept communities alive. At its heart, the ability to run for days came from unity. Unity of mind and body, of people and land, of spirit and purpose. This balance created stamina that seemed supernatural to outsiders, but felt natural to those who had practiced it since childhood. Native Americans ran not to conquer distance, but to belong to it, moving endlessly, steadily, and with meaning in every breath. Endurance among Native Americans was not limited to hunting or survival. It became a strategy that reshaped how communities defended themselves and communicated across vast landscapes. Running was not simply about distance, but about power. The power to move faster than an enemy, to deliver warnings in time, and to remain unseen until the right moment arrived. In warfare, runners were essential. A single man could slip through forests or across prairies, carrying intelligence to warriors positioned miles apart. While European forces relied on mounted riders who announced themselves with the sound of hooves, Native American runners moved silently, leaving no trail but soft footprints. This advantage allowed warriors to coordinate with precision, striking where they were least expected. Surprise was their weapon, and endurance made it possible. Soldiers marching in heavy gear and cavalry clattering across plains could not match the speed or subtlety of a runner weaving through woodland. Entire battles were won because messages arrived swiftly, outpacing the enemy's ability to prepare. Beyond conflict, running held communities together. Villages hundreds of miles apart stayed connected through the footsteps of messengers. News of treaties, trade opportunities, or approaching threats traveled on human legs, sometimes faster and more reliably than horses burdened by terrain. A runner leaving at dawn could arrive by nightfall, carrying words that might decide peace or war. The responsibility placed on these runners was immense. A village's survival could depend on one person's endurance. Communities prayed for their safe return, understanding that lives hung in the balance of their stamina. Each message delivered was more than information. It was hope carried in a leather pouch or carved stick. Even pursuit became strategy. Enemies often exhausted themselves trying to catch runners who seemed tireless. Every step that drained pursuers of breath gave native warriors more time to gather strength, reposition, or vanish into terrain. Endurance became an invisible weapon, one that confused and demoralized those who could not understand it. Through this ability, distance itself turned into power. For Native Americans, Running was not only a skill of survival, it was a shield, a sword, and a lifeline. Endurance was not only a weapon of war, but also a shield against hardship. When famine struck or herds wandered far, running made the difference between scarcity and survival. Hunters could cover dozens of miles in a single day, tracking game where others would have given up. Their persistence kept families fed when weather turned harsh or rivers ran dry. In times of crisis, runners became the heartbeat of communities. When illness spread or danger approached, it was their footsteps that carried warnings and summoned aid. A runner leaving at sunrise could unite distant settlements before nightfall. In these moments, speed was not measured in miles per hour, but in lives preserved. Every successful run meant a village spared from hunger, ambush, or isolation. Endurance also preserved cultural strength. Long-distance running was not abandoned even when horses became widespread. Horses offered speed, but they could tire, stumble, or falter in terrain where human feet could still glide. Runners remained the dependable messengers, carrying words with certainty across deserts, mountains, and forests. This resilience showed that identity was not tied to tools alone, but to knowledge passed through generations. Stories celebrated the courage of these runners. Children were told of ancestors who ran through storms, across blizzards, or past enemies to deliver hope. These tales were not myths, but lessons, teaching that endurance was as much mental as physical. By honoring these examples, every new generation understood that to run was to serve. The philosophy of endurance reached beyond survival. Running reminded people that strength was not domination but persistence, not force but rhythm. The earth was not conquered by faster feet, but embraced through steady ones. To belong to the land was to match its pace, mile after mile, never hurried, never broken. In this way, running bound together war and peace, hunger and plenty, solitude and community. It was the constant heartbeat that carried Native Americans across centuries. Their endurance was not only the power to outlast an enemy, it was the power to endure history itself, to remain, to remember, and to keep moving forward. The endurance of Native Americans was more than a skill of the past. It was a foundation that carried their people through centuries of challenge and change. What began as survival on the trail became resilience in the face of history itself. Running was not just movement, it was persistence given form, proof that no hardship could silence a people who kept moving forward. Generations relied on this endurance in times of migration. When seasons shifted or rivers flooded, families packed belongings and moved on foot, guided by those who knew how to outlast fatigue. Endurance kept elders safe, carried children across valleys, and ensured that entire communities could travel together without being left behind. The ability to move as one body gave strength not just to individuals, but to nations. During famine or disaster, endurance meant life itself. Runners covered endless miles to find new hunting grounds, to discover fertile soil, or to trade with distant allies. They endured hunger, storms, and exhaustion because they carried the survival of many on their shoulders. Each mile was responsibility made visible. Without their stamina, families would have gone hungry, villages might have withered, and stories could have been lost. Endurance also shaped identity. To be a runner was to hold honor. Communities saw them as protectors, providers, and living examples of strength. Songs were sung of their journeys, stories told of their courage, and children grew up knowing that footsteps could carry both history and hope. In this way, endurance became not only a physical act, but a cultural memory, a legacy passed down like sacred knowledge. Even as the world changed, endurance continued to protect cultural spirit. When outsiders disrupted lifeways and landscapes, it was endurance that allowed Native Americans to adapt without losing themselves. They endured displacement, struggle, and hardship much as their ancestors endured storms and mountains. By steady breath, by steady steps, by refusing to collapse. To run was to survive, and to survive was to remain. Endurance was more than a way to move across land. It was a way to carry memory. Every runner retraced the footsteps of those who came before, reminding their people that survival depended on honoring tradition as much as on strength. The trail was not just soil beneath their feet. It was history itself, stretching backward and forward through generations. Communities recognized runners as living symbols of connection. A single messenger might link villages separated by mountains or deserts, ensuring that people felt less isolated in vast landscapes. With each completed journey, the runner reminded their community that no distance was too great to bridge. The miles between families, between settlements, between allies could be crossed by human will alone. This endurance created unity in times of division. When famine, conflict, or dislocation threatened to fragment communities, running tied them together. A pouch delivered across valleys could mean food secured, peace confirmed, or danger avoided. In this way, runners became threads weaving the fabric of survival, invisible but indispensable. The philosophy of endurance shaped cultural values. To persist was to be strong. To endure was to be honorable. Songs and dances celebrated not speed, but stamina. Children were taught that true strength was measured not in moments of victory, but in the ability to keep moving, even when tired, even when afraid. Running embodied that principle in its purest form. Even as centuries passed and the world transformed, the lesson of endurance remained. Native Americans endured displacement, broken treaties, and hardships far beyond the trail. Yet they carried forward the same spirit that once pushed runners through storms and over mountains: steady breath, steady steps, refusal to collapse. The endurance that once fed families and carried messages now carried identity itself. In the end, running was more than survival, more than strategy, more than ceremony. It was proof that persistence could outlast suffering, that resilience could outlast hardship, and that culture could outlast history's trials. For Native Americans, to run was to remain, and to remain was victory. The story of Native American endurance does not end in the past. Its lessons still echo today, reminding us that strength is not only about speed or power, but about persistence. In a world that moves faster than ever, the wisdom of steady breath and steady steps carries meaning we often forget. Modern athletes train with technology, diet plans, and specialized shoes, yet many rediscover truths that Native Americans knew for centuries: that the body is capable of far more than it seems, if guided by rhythm, patience, and spirit. Science now praises interval training, mindful breathing, and endurance diets. But these were already practiced on trails across forests and plains long before laboratories confirmed them. Even beyond athletics, the philosophy of running endures. To keep moving through hardship, to treat fatigue as a teacher, and to find purpose in persistence. These are lessons not limited to races or marathons. They are lessons for life itself. Native American runners remind us that survival has always depended on continuing forward, one step at a time, even when paths seem endless. Running was never about conquest. It was about belonging. Every mile carried connection. To family waiting at the next fire, to ancestors who once traced the same horizon, and to the land itself. In that sense, running became a dialogue with the world. The earth giving resistance, the runner giving breath, and together creating balance. For modern audiences, these stories are not distant curiosities, but living guides. In every challenge we face, whether physical, emotional, or cultural, the same truth applies. Endurance matters more than speed. Native American wisdom shows that victory is not found in finishing first, but in refusing to stop. What once preserved villages now offers guidance to us all. To endure is to live with purpose, to carry history forward, and to prove that hardship cannot silence the determined. The footsteps of Native American runners echo across centuries, and if we listen, we can still hear them teaching us how to move through life itself. The endurance of Native Americans was never only about the miles they covered. It was about what those miles carried: the weight of responsibility, the safety of families, the memory of ancestors, and the hope of generations yet to come. Every step was more than movement. It was a promise to return, to deliver, to endure for others. Centuries later, those footsteps still matter. We may not run across prairies with pouches tied to our sides, but the challenges we face demand the same persistence. Each of us must learn to breathe steadily through hardship, to keep pace when the path seems endless, and to remember that endurance is not measured in speed but in survival. The world celebrates quick victories and short races, but Native American wisdom shows a deeper truth. The one who lasts, the one who does not stop, the one who keeps moving despite pain or struggle. That is the one who truly wins. Victory is not crossing a line before others. It is refusing to collapse before the journey is done. These lessons are not trapped in the past. They live in every challenge we endure today. They whisper in our ears when we are tired, reminding us to take one more step. They echo in our hearts when life feels overwhelming, urging us to steady our breath. The footsteps of Native American runners are still teaching, even if the trail is now paved with modern struggles. So ask yourself, when the path grows long and the burden feels heavy, what will you do? Will you stop, or will you continue? The wisdom of Native Americans gives us the answer. You endure. You keep moving. You honor the footsteps of those who came before by making your own. In the rhythm of their running, we hear a timeless truth. Survival belongs to those who persist. And persistence, above all else, is victory.